Good morning, everybody. It is the last day of February. Woohoo, we made it. Another month till the nice weather comes, and oh boy, am I looking forward to it because it is gross out there today. Uh, Still trying to figure out why I can't get my camera looking better. I don't know if it's because of the. I do have a screen protector on it. Maybe that's it, but I don't like how this looks. Anyway, so today, in honor of African American History Month, this week I read Kindred, and I also binge watched the show yesterday. This one season wonder. Unfortunately, they have canceled it, so there's not going to be a second season. Um, I have a lot of mixed, complicated feelings about Kindred. Um, Partly informed by watching the responses from Black creators who pointed out that we pretty consistently get slave narratives, and we always hear a lot about trauma to our Black friends, and it's there's a point where it kind of becomes theater. And another creator also pointed out that she explained that it sort of appeals to the white gaze because of all the people that the character was connected to. Why was it the one little white boy? Okay, so I'm gonna unpack that a little bit in a minute. So yeah, I bought the book a few years ago, never got around to reading it, and then I kind of misplaced the paperback, so I bought it in ebook. So I ended up reading the ebook, and okay, I'm totally ignorant of these things. I thought it was like a vampire thing at first because, back in the mid '90s there was this god awful Canadian TV show. It was called Kindred: The Embrace, and it was, or no, Kindred Embrace the Vampire, or Kindred the Embrace, something like that. Anyway, and it was based on the White Wolf Vampire LARP game. So I thought Kindred was a vampire book, and also because Octavia Butler has written other stories that I think kind of they're like weird alien vampire things or something. I don't know. Anyway, maybe I'm completely misinformed on these things. So imagine my surprise when I was expecting one thing and got something completely different, but that's my own ignorance. Okay, so Kindred. Now, apparently it's Octavia Butler's best-selling novel. It was published in 1979. And it falls very squarely in what I consider speculative fiction to be. Now, speculative fiction it's kind of a loaded term, but to me, what it literally comes down to is an author asks a question: what would happen if? And then the story proceeds to explore that what if. So in this particular question, it's also what they call high concept, which you can sort of explain it in about 1 to 2 sentences. So what would happen if somebody from modern times was transported through time and had to survive on an antebellum South slave plantation? So that's the basic premise. It's about a young woman named Dana. She and her husband have just moved into a new house, and they're, doing normal stuff, unpacking, reading, and she starts to feel dizzy and nauseated, which if you've ever fainted, that's exactly how you start to feel. Everything starts to go, and then suddenly you're on the ground. But in this case, she wakes up in a creek and there's a little boy there and he's drowning. So she pulls him out, performs mouth to mouth, and his mother, who is this god-awful, shrieking shrew of a woman, she's freaking horrible. She's flipping out, thinking that, first of all, thinking that because Dana's wearing pants, she's a man, and second, that she's going to kill her boy. So the boy's father shows up, points a gun at Dana, and she snaps back to her own time, her own reality. And her husband is like, what happened? Where did you go? Because she comes back and she's like wet and covered in mud and rocks and dirt. And she explains what happened. And he's like, did you have a hallucination? Like, what? Because we want to believe that the person is mentally ill or schizophrenic or something. You say, I went to another world, people are going to think you're crazy, right? Even though he saw with his own eyes that she wasn't there and then she was back. So the first time she's only gone for a few seconds, and then she goes again. But when she goes back to this mysterious little boy, he's 3 years older, and he's just set fire to the house. Okay, now this kid is a little shit, by the way. He just gets worse and worse as he goes. So she ends up going back and forth a few times, and each time she stays longer. And she becomes she sort of becomes part of the group on the plantation. She makes friends with the people that live there. And her cover story is basically she was freeborn. But she also, there's a point where she accidentally brings Kevin back with her. And so now she's Kevin's property, slave, whatever. He's speaking for her. I'm not going to go too much further. Okay, so we'll go back to the first, the first chapter. It also starts out talking about, like, the very first chapter. She says she lost an arm this time when she came back, which is a really shocking and violent way to start a story, right? So you quickly forget. Now I will say one thing that I found was kind of set up, but it didn't come back in the same way I thought it was going to. There's a doctor on the plantation, and he's useless as tits on a hen as far as actually, doctoring people. Because he talks about, like, he lets blood and he does all this ridiculous stuff which was totally normal in the early 1800s. But he also will remove limbs for whatever reasons. So I honestly thought, when we started getting toward the end, and then remembering, oh yeah, Dana's supposed to lose an arm here, I thought that was what was going to happen. I thought that something was going to happen, like she was going to get bit by a rattlesnake or something, and they were going to have to take off her arm, right? But that didn't happen. So but I was reading another essay, which is at the end of the book, and they explained that Octavia Butler included that as symbolically, nobody escaped slavery whole, right? And so this idea of fundamentally just being broken, and kind of the more that I read about American history, they never got over the Civil War, and that's why the more years pass and the more voices you have shouting and offering all these different ridiculous opinions, the more I just realized that, yeah, America was never whole, was never not broken, because it was founded on something fundamental about people owning other people, right? And I'm not saying that Canada is any less broken or that we have less blood on our hands. Slavery, racism is slightly different in Canada because slavery was not as big a thing here. Slavery didn't write our laws in the same way. Slavery was abolished in the Commonwealth by I think it was like late 1835 or something that it was abolished. So I'm not saying that we're better or anything. It's different here. And reading Kindred as a white person, there's a couple of things that I was made aware, or that I sort of felt very keenly aware of. The first is that when you see a movie, yeah, I mean, let's say something like Roots, right? You are set in the place of watching the people sort of exist around the white characters. When I was reading Kindred, and you know, again, I mean, you see the horrible things happen. You see how upsetting it is to have your children sold. You see all of these terrible things. But what I found, I'll compare it to Roots because that's, I think that was a really, really good story. And it was, it was big, it was far reaching, but it was told from the third person perspective. So you're still a little bit removed and you're still kind of watching the activity happen. And I mean, just as a human being, obviously, if you don't feel some kind of sympathy or empathy, there's something wrong with you. But the way that Octavia Butler centered the action around somebody from our modern times who, was raised in the States, who has an education, who still had to look at these people being treated this way, and yet be in this middle position where she's educated, so the enslaved people don't trust her because she talks white, and the white people don't trust her because she doesn't defer the way she's supposed to in this time. So there's this constant sense of unease and this feeling that this could be kicked out from under her and she could be sold and go someplace that is much, much worse. And it also examines, one of the sort of things that I read kind of in passing was that, as white people, we try to rewrite the slave narrative and say, well, maybe it wasn't that bad. I mean, even yesterday, like literally yesterday, I read a tweet from a guy who said, well, you always see these slave narratives about people who, that they were beaten and that was horrible and this and that. But what about the good ones? What about the ones who weren't mean to their slaves, who wanted to keep them fed and in a nice way? And I was like, there is no such thing as a good slaver. I'm whiter than boiled cauliflower, and even I know that. Like, what the actual fuck? But we do try to rewrite that idea because, and that's one of the things that kind of gets explored in the book, is that as a modern woman, Dana wants to say, why do you put up with that? But at the same time, she understands that if you don't, you will be whipped and you will die. There's no end game here. There's no rights. There's no legal recourse. All of this is what they are allowed to do. And they are horrible. And every single white character is fucking awful. And I don't take offense as a white person because sort of centering it that way really, it puts a face on the arguments that we've had for, a long time, that yes, every white person has benefited from white supremacy. And I don't know how to fix it or how to change it, but I don't think we can move forward unless we acknowledge this fact. And again, maybe this is really simplistic, but I mean, 400 years after slavery started, and we're still arguing, oh, well, you shouldn't teach critical race theory in schools. But critical race theory is not the same thing as history. So yeah, I have a lot of feels about the book. It's a great book. I mean, 5 out of 5. It's really, I mean, the pace is fantastic. The characters are well drawn. You're gonna hate everybody in it, but you also, I mean, there's just this constant feeling of dread and horror. And is it a horror novel? Is it a fantasy novel? I think Octavia Butler referred to it as a work of grim fantasy, which I think is appropriate. And also, the way it's structured is as a work of fantasy. Okay, Orson Scott Card, and yes, fuck Orson Scott Card, he's a terrible person, but his book, How to Write Sci-Fi and Fantasy, he said there are basically, like, it's really good if you want to study world building. So he said there's basically 4 different types of fantasy stories, and he goes by the what's the word, acronym MICE, M-I-C-E. Milieu, idea, character, event. So milieu is a character from our world goes to a fantastical time and place. So, for example, your Wizard of Oz, Chronicles of Narnia, and Alice in Wonderland. And the person themselves aren't changed that much, but they affect the world that they go to. And they perform some sort of work there before they come back. And maybe they are changed to a point, but not as much as they change the world around them. So in this case, this is a milieu story. This is somebody from our world going to this other time, which is a time that really existed in history, but it still functions as a place of not here and now. The other one's idea, character, event. He uses an example. Like, idea is a really abstract one, but the example he uses was a story by, I believe I want to say Isaac Asimov, but I'm not 100% sure, where it was about a bunch of people who were on a dying planet or a dying star, and then the star people, something happens, and then it turns out that it was actually the star that was hanging in the sky the night Jesus was born. And then character is, again, it just follows a sort of a character's journey. That's your typical hero's journey, or, rise and fall. And then event is everything in the story is leading up to something. So, for example, something like, he uses Harry Potter. It's a mixture of character and event. So, on the one hand, you've got Harry Potter, who's the boy who lived, and he is leading up to the Second Wizarding War, right? So, anyway, so this is a milieu story. This is somebody from our world going to this other place and time. And in a lot of ways, it does have to sort of follow, it never answers exactly why or how Dana is able to travel back in time. She just is. And I thought that was kind of interesting too, because that essay pointed out that a lot of the time, we see stories of time travel, but they talk about the mechanics of time travel, the physics of time travel. But this story, this is more Ray Bradbury. This exists, and that's all you need to know about it. And then the other thing that I really liked, that I thought was really interesting, was that it was just the title Kindred. It thematically, it looks at what kin means and what kindred means, and the way that you're tied to your family, even if they're people that you don't like, and how these are the roots that make you what you are today. So her tie to this little shit, Rufus, that's her kindred. That's her distant family. And then she also talks about her husband as a kindred spirit, and they're connected because they love each other and they have stuff in common. And there's an examination of how she is alike and not alike certain people. And even in particular, again, every white person in the book is fucking horrible. Even her husband, who's a great guy, when she accidentally drags him back to the past, he starts to take on some of the traits of the people around him just for the sake of survival. And, it always does raise the question, what would you do in that position? And a lot of people say, oh, I'd totally be an abolitionist. I'd be helping people. But no, you wouldn't. Most people wouldn't. Most people put their head down and do what they need to do to survive. And when you're white in a situation like that, you're in the privileged position where even if you want to help people, a lot of the time you can't. And it's just crap all around. And that's what's so dark about the book, is knowing what's unfolding and just the absolute helplessness to be able to change it. I'm not going to talk too much about the series. The series wasn't like the book very much. There were things I liked about it. The actress who played Dana, bingo, she was perfect. She was great. She has these wonderfully expressive eyes. Like, she's just she's gorgeous to look at. But she also has this constant, like, what the actual fuck look on her face, because she just perfectly conveys its fear and its suppression of so much emotion. And she's wonderful. I really, really like the actress that they got to play Dana. I thought that the guy that got to play Kevin was cute, but I think they did the character dirty, because in the book they were married, but in the show they've just met. So he's just kind of a boyfriend and like a guy that she just met. And then they have these really annoying neighbors, this total Karen who keeps knocking on the door going, "Are you okay in there?" Even though the book kind of mentions in passing, oh yeah, the neighbors called the cops. So I understand kind of why they had to expand some things just to pad out the runtime. But I think it would have been a better show if they had cut it down to maybe 4 episodes at most, and not padded it out, not added the subplot with her mother, and just told the story more directly. And by padding out the runtime, they ended it on a cliffhanger, but that cliffhanger is never going to be resolved because the show was canceled. And the other thing that they had to do in the series that I didn't like was that, I want to say it was Bret Easton Ellis. I'm pretty sure it was Bret Easton Ellis. He says, books don't require answers. You can ask questions and explore, but you don't have to provide answers. Whereas film is a more concrete medium. And when you ask questions, people are expecting a payoff. They're expecting answers. And so as they're exploring this world, what they did was they added a subplot that this ability to travel in time is somehow hereditary. So it's like a butterfly effect thing, which I think kind of cheapens the mystery that we get in the book. Oh, and the actress that they got to play Margaret, Margaret Whalen, again, one more time, is an absolutely horrid woman. But the actress they got to play her is perfect. She's fucking great. And she's the actress who played the she-wolf on Glow, so I'm very happy that, that she's out there, she's still doing stuff, and I mean, Glow was a great series. I was really sad when it was canceled. So I'm really glad that they got her to play it, and she's fucking perfect. Oh God, what a horrible woman. Other than that, yeah, I mean, there's so much more that I could talk about, but I think I've blathered for long enough. It's a complicated book to read, and it looks at just an awful time in history, and it's something that was never left behind. And I think that, when you're reading slave narratives like that, and the trauma narratives, they don't want you to forget it. And I mean, we're still like, I mean, the Dilbert guy just got his comic strip pulled for making racist remarks. Like, aren't we past that? When do we get past it? How do we get past it? I don't know. So I've also got N.K. Jemison's, one is it Afrofuture Month, I think it's called. Something about Afrofuture Month. And one of the, again, another creator that I was watching, she pointed out, she's like, yeah, that's why they like to read, Afrofuturism, where they can look at fantasy of a world where all this stuff we are past it. And yeah, I like stories where people are successful, not where people are horrified and traumatized in this just awful, awful world. But I do hope that the next book I read has a happy ending of some kind. At least there was a resolution in the book, which we're not going to get from the series. So anyway, if you read Kindred, if you enjoyed it, let me know. I don't know what else to say. It was a good book. It's a great read. I highly recommend it. 5 out of 5 stars. Kindred by Octavia Butler. Hope you're reading lots of horror. Have a great day.